Okay. So today, the hope is that as you leave, you'll have three really good ideas as essential ways that you can help prevent kind of turnover and burnout and keep your best employees. That's obviously been a big issue. It's interesting for me coming from kind of business and nonprofit world to medical and understanding over the last 6 years, practice managers, you all have a ton on your plates. You've got a lot that you're trying to deal with. You're essentially running point with your staff, trying to cover when people can't come in. You're probably the point person when there's an issue with a troubled patient, maybe IT. You're hiring people, you're dealing with performance, you're the in between, oftentimes negotiating if there's ever conflict with employees or providers. And so you've got a lot on your plate. And so a lot of things fall to you that make your leadership position something really challenging. And over the last couple of years, employee engagement has shifted a bit. So we're going to talk some about how it's shifted, what's important for you to know, because the best leaders are the ones who are ahead of the game, not just keeping up. And it's really easy in any job to get kind of caught in the emergency issues that are happening, but it's best for you to stay ahead of it and to be thinking about how can we prevent problems in the future. And in the last couple of years, we've kind of just been trying to keep our head above water, and that makes it harder for us to get ahead of issues to prevent people leaving. So we use this illustration as we jump in to kind of talk about employee engagement. So I want to update you some on current things and where things have moved and the way that we're thinking, behaving at work, because that's changed a bit up front here, and then talk about the roles you need to play as a practice manager to really help keep your best people and some practical ways to do that. So some of the shifts, traditionally, you've probably heard about employee engagement. Gallup measures this for the last 23 years or so, since I think 2000, 2001. And engagement looks like this in the typical organization, that you have about, if you picture 10 people in a rowboat, the first three people are rowing really hard and all in. And then you've got five people that are, they're giving about 65% of the effort that they can, maybe depending on who's looking or what day it is. And then there's two people in the back, either just kind of along for the ride or actively trying to do harm to people in the boat. That's the typical team. 36% engaged, 14% actively disengaged on the left. What's interesting is employee engagement of the last 20 years has been trending up every year in the last 20 years. But what's happened in the last 18 months is that you can see the shift here, that in 2023, things have started to regress a bit. And we've hit about a 10-year low with employee engagement in the United States. So fewer people are engaged, more people are disengaged. The way we view work has shifted. And there's a few other things that have shifted. So a couple of important shifts for you to know about as a practice manager when it comes to how people are thinking about work and their engagement. Number one is that employee engagement is at a 10-year low in the US. People have become less excited about work. They've questioned whether they want to work or what kind of work they want to do in the midst of all this change. It's affected us all a little bit socially, psychologically. And you can see that in the way employees are engaging. You may have more employees who are more frustrated, maybe a little more demanding at times. People aren't as, all in as they were before. Another thing is that in medical, turnover and burnout are at all-time highs in medical practices. Turnover tends to hover in independent medical practices right around 20%. Through the pandemic till now, we've seen that hit 25, 26% in medical practices, independent practices. So as we're trying to help you, help your team, it's really important that you can prevent some of the turnover and burnout. And then thirdly, there's a list of about 8 or 9 things that cause people to quit their jobs, that would push people towards not working for you. Those reasons are generally the same and usually stay in about the same order as to what is most important, but that's shifted a bit in the last couple of years. So I want to show you that for a second, because it's important, I think, for you all to understand how it's shifted, because it's definitely going to help you prepare your team for where things are headed. So there's kind of some ups and downs when it comes to turnover and burnout. We just jump here. This is we did that. It's shifted. And there's some ups and downs when it comes to turnover and burnout. You've probably all experienced. It's kind of a roller coaster ride, right? I was talking to some practice managers last week at a conference that we're giving on this same kind of topic. And it does feel like we've been up and down and up and down, and it's made it harder for people, as office managers, practice administrators to engage with their team. And some of the experience that we have through the last couple of years, some of the things that have gone up are things like workload, right? When people get burnt out, they quit. When they quit, that increases the workload for everybody else. That when the workload goes up, then stress goes up. And when stress goes up, then so does the negativity. You've probably seen this where stress is increased, people get more frustrated, they're more quick-tempered, more likely to take out that frustration on others. And then as a result, some things are going down. When we lose people, morale goes down, right? If workload's up, stress is up, negativity's up, our morale goes down. So people are less engaged, which means they're less productive. So productivity goes down, and so does our profit. That's a natural impact of turnover and burnout. And the cost of that is significant. I won't go deep into this. There's a lot of study. Generally, when you lose an employee, it costs you about 136% of their salary to replace them. That's gone up over the last 2 years to now the studies are showing 142%. So think if you have an MA who's making, maybe 40,000 a year, the cost to replace them is probably going to be 58,000-ish. And that's direct cost, recruiting, paying people overtime, indirect cost, like the people who are filling in there. We had a practice in Ohio that has about 20 providers, 110 employees recently we're speaking with. And the short version is they were short 5 people. So we were doing a practice assessment to help them understand why some people were leaving and why the turnover, because that had gone up in the last couple of years. A really great practice with strong culture. And they had 2 pockets where they were short people. And those 2 departments were more frustrated, more burnout, more tired, and they were losing more people. It became this vicious cycle, right? And what we found as we talked about it, they had candidates that could have taken those jobs that they knew were great candidates, but they wanted to make $3 or $4 more an hour than they typically paid for those roles. So the practice had turned them down. What they came to find out was 6 months had gone by and they hadn't gotten employees, and they had a director of operations spending 30 hours a week searching for people and interviewing people, getting ghosted. Their CEO was spending 20 hours of her week helping search for people and try to interview and relist ads and things. The supervisors in those 2 areas were filling in about half their time. And then they had a couple of people in each area doing 10 to 12 hours of overtime. At the end of the day, the time they'd invested over the last 6 months to try to save about $8,000 to pay some of these employees, they'd invested $165,000 of their time trying to find employees when they had some good ones at the beginning. So that's the cost of turnover, right? Unfilled spots, people at higher levels are having to engage more and do some of that work. It's very expensive. A nurse can be over $100,000. Your average practice employee, 60. So it's important that we do what we can to listen to our employees and understand what they need. Another interesting fact here is that this study was done. I saw this on LinkedIn recently, that as an employee care study, they found that employees who leave because they're burnt out, not just because they're changing for, a better, maybe they're moving or they want different hours or something like that. But those who leave because they're burnt out are 2 times more likely to talk other people, to convince other people to go with them. So if they leave because they're burnt out, they're more likely to be whispering to your people after they go to say, hey, can you pay us this over here? Or come with me to work in customer service at Target and you'll make X and you won't have to do all this stuff that you might have to in that practice. So preventing that is really important. Here's a couple of the shifts that we've seen. So the reason people quit, again, there's 9 typical reasons. You've heard a lot of these. The number one from 2016 to 2021, it was all basically the same. The number one reason people quit: bad boss, bad manager relationship. We've all heard people quit their job, they quit their boss, not their jobs. It's a very true fact. The second thing is recognition. Everybody wants to feel recognized for what they do. So that's a very common reason. Third, fourth, fifth, trust, integrity, feeling heard and valued, feeling respected are really critical to employees. And then you get to number 6. This one's cited more than it's actually true, but it's compensation. People generally will say, I'm leaving for more money. Oftentimes they say that because it's easier to say than, you know what, I don't like my boss, or my boss doesn't seem to listen to me or care about me. 7, they want better career development and advancement. Most people The average raise that happens in an organization in America is about 3%. The average raise when you leave one organization to go to another is like 10 to 14%. So compensation is the thing. People are looking for opportunities to advance. They want meaningful work. And this ninth one, it was a new one about 5 years ago. Work-life flexibility hadn't really been on the scale as to reasons people would quit to go to another job, but it made it into the top 10. But what I want you to notice here is the shift in the last 2 years, because again, the way we think about work has changed. In the last 18 months, the data has shown that it's almost flip-flopped. So manager relationship, usually number one, dropped to 6. Now, again, these are the top reasons people are leaving. So none of these are non-factors for people, but they've shifted a bit in what people are saying as they go. Recognition stayed about the same, which is really critical to note. That's one of the greatest predictors of people leaving. The trust and integrity, feeling heard and valued, respect, those drop to the bottom from 3, 4, 5. Look at where compensation, now when people leave, they cite that as the number one reason. I have some thoughts about that in just a second. And then notice that work-life flexibility went from last to second in the last couple of years. So if you've got people who are saying, hey, I need to make more money, or I need more flexibility, or I want to work from home, that's a very common request right now. So you can see this almost inverted. It's the same top 10 reasons that people are leaving, but the priority and the number one reasons they're citing have flipped. Now, here's the important part, I think, for practice managers. It's that we do assessment with a lot of our practices, and I've heard the same story when I do interviews of people in practices to help them, understand, practice managers understand how to build the type of environment that people need. As I'm interviewing people, what I'll hear from independent practice employees very frequently is, you know what, I intentionally joined an independent practice because I felt like they were going to care for me. I felt like I wouldn't have to work evenings and weekends. The pressure would be a little lower. If I had a son who was sick, or I needed to go visit my mom or something, and there was a good reason I couldn't work that day, they would be flexible and understand that. And they cared about me. So I'm willing to take a job that pays a little less, because if you're in an independent practice, you could always, there's jobs open all the time in the hospital systems and big groups, right? I can choose to do that. I can choose to apply for those, but I would rather take the environment where I feel cared for and don't have to be overly worked. And I'm willing to take a little less money to do that. What happened during the pandemic, especially, is that we lost people. So I had to work more. My work flexibility went down. The stress went up. My workload went up. And all of a sudden, I can't take time off. A lot of people said, yeah, I was sick, but my practice, manager or boss said I have to come in anyway. So that pressure went up. And all of a sudden, people wake up one day and go, wait a minute, I decided to work in an independent practice because they were going to care for me. They were going to understand me. They weren't going to put pressure on me to work overtime, right? And all of a sudden now, I don't hear from them as much. I feel more pressure to work, and I've got to work overtime, and the workload's higher. Why wouldn't I just work over here and make more money for that stress? We won them in independent practice generally with a better culture environment. And so when that has gone away, and that's eroded a bit in the pandemic, people have questioned, maybe I should just work over there and make more money. So generally when people come in a medical practice, I'm finding that they're saying, oh, I should make more money, because they're thinking, I'm not getting paid for this stress, right? That isn't primary reason for a lot of them. It is for some. So what that tells me is, one of the essentials we have to do as practice leaders and managers is to be listening to our people a lot more. They're missing that human connection they've had. And as things have gotten hard as a practice manager and you've had more on your plate, it's easier to let that thing go of talking to people and caring for them. So here are the 3 essentials you've got to do as a practice manager. And these are kind of 3 roles you have to play, and a couple of practical things, very practical things. Number 1, you have to think about your job, not just as a fill this position, make sure we're doing this, and we're sending this report and checking in on this, the finances, but you are the chief listening officer. People look to you to be the eyes and ears of the practice, and they look to you to be the primary person to kind of care for them and know what's going on. And the way that you do that is through manager one-on-ones. And every industry generally knows that management one-on-ones are really important. If you're leading anybody and have direct reports, you need to be meeting with those people for 20 minutes every week. Some places do it 40 minutes every other week, but there's a regular meeting with just that one employee that reports to you, each one of them. And it's not about specifically their work performance, but to say, hey, how are things going? What's going really well? What's getting in your way, and how can I help you? I mean, it's those four things. How are things going? What's going well? What's getting in your way, and how can I help you? That's the point of a one-on-one. Every industry out there knows how important these is. Medical practices have been kind of slow to pick these up. They say, well, we're productive and we don't have time for that. But I can tell you, this one thing is one of the greatest indicators as to how well you're listening to your people and how engaged they are we doing one-on-ones or not? I know consultants that's that question anytime they're doing employee engagement work, straight out. Are you doing one-on-ones? And what's happening in those? That's the first question they ask. So if you do nothing else after leaving this, make sure you're doing those and your supervisors are doing those to listen to your people. And secondly, even when you're meeting with people, they're not going to tell you everything because they're afraid of the recourse for that. So employee pulse surveys are really important. Big practices are doing this. Hospitals are doing this. Great businesses are doing, instead of one big assessment a year, and we've got a new tool we're going to tell you about that's going to help you facilitate these, but employee pulse surveys are a short survey once a week that gets you a little bit of data about where people are. That's anonymous, so people can say, hey, this isn't going well, or this person's driving me crazy, without fearing that that's going to come back to hurt them. No matter how great a relationship you have with your people, they're not telling you everything. So these are a great way for that to be some anonymous listening that you get to do. And employees feel empowered to be honest and know that you're going to hear from them. Second thing, you got to be the chief recognition officer. Recognition is always a top two driver of people quitting, and people want to hear routinely, generally at least once a week, that they're doing a good job, and you see what that is. That isn't generic. It's got to be specific about what they're doing and how that impacts. And it also has to be democratized. So that means not just you as a manager, but we've got to create a system where people can recognize one another. It's not just coming from the office manager, but their peers from other departments, maybe from a provider. Those words weigh a lot for people and they mean a lot to people. So find a way to reward and recognize people when they do well, especially according to your values. It's really important that you're encouraging the kind of behavior that you want to see continue to, be displayed by people. So you're the chief listening officer, chief recognition officer. You're also the chief storytelling officer as a practice manager. When you get these good stories, you have to tell them over and over again. Stories drive people's behavior more than anything else. So when you see somebody doing something well, make sure you tell it as often as you can. It exhibits to people that you see them, and we remember stories. Our brains are wired for that more than anything else. So you have to be capturing those good stories. As soon as you get tired of telling a story, when you capture a good one, tell it 10 more times and then maybe retire it for a while. But you'll get tired of it before others will. I have a good leader who I got to do some work with a number of years ago. He said, Keith, you have to think as a leader, you're preaching to a parade. People are walking by, they're working, they're not catching everything. So you have to say it over and over as they circle through this parade route before they really catch it. So you have to stay laser focused on your why you do what you do, and tell those stories that reinforce why we do what we do. So here's a quick thing that we've put in place to help you do this. So this is a live version of a pulse survey that we just created. This is live now, something that is, you're the first group hearing about this really. And what this is an employee pulse version of a survey that your staff can get, and it fills out weekly. It takes literally 60 to 90 seconds for your staff to complete this. And there's a question or two that help you track how burnout people are and how they're feeling about culture every week. So you get a sense of how things are moving over time for the practice, you as a practice manager. Then they fill out a portion that goes directly to managers. Okay. So this, if you don't feel like you have time for management one-on-ones, this short questionnaire, and I've done this in businesses in the past as a participant, it speeds up that one-on-one because it asks these questions about what do you need, what's going well. So when your manager sits down, they get this report every week of everybody who reports to them when they submit it to say, here's how I'm feeling, here's what's going well, here's what I need from you as a manager. And it helps speed up that management one-on-one conversation in a really powerful way. You can see this is a lifetime version of what it takes to fill this out. So it takes literally 60 to 90 seconds. And if you could prevent turnover and burnout by spending 60 seconds, would you do that? Right. That really is what it takes. And then what you get as a practice manager is you get access to all this great kind of data that you get a dashboard that has your name up front. This is our pretend version, but this is some real data from a couple of clients, but that helps you see on average, how is our culture scoring? You can see our turnover risk here and our burnout risk for this practice. You could say, oh, okay, well, that's great. Let's see what the RNs are, and click on that. And you can see, oh, okay, they're doing a little better. Their score's a little higher. Oh, but maybe billing and clinical. I mean, let's look at them. Oh, their turnover risk is a lot higher. You can see here because opportunities to learn and advance, trust, recognition are a lot lower. So this helps you see as a practice manager where improvement needs to be made so you can prevent it. So that one form that takes 60 seconds, if you're getting that every week, will be informing these dashboards. And it helps you then, have one just for your practice. Like here, this is the department dashboard. How are people feeling week over week? Is their manager following up on their needs? How are they recognizing each other? Because there's a part there where you can recognize people. And you can look at each department and see that, okay, billing's about a 3.4 out of 5. Scheduling is a 3.3. And notice here, their manager isn't following up a lot on their needs. So this gives you some practical tools. And there's a recognition piece of this at the end where somebody could, at the end of that manager check-in that says, do you want to recognize somebody? They can fill that out, say thank you and impact, and that'll get automatically sent to that person to let them know that they've been appreciated and high-fived. And you get a list of those so that you can see those stories and celebrate them. So it empowers you as a practice manager to really kind of lead those efforts. So this is a short thing. Just want to give you a quick commercial about it because it is a really easy way that it kind of empowers you. It does empower you to show your staff that you can hear from them, give them a quick and easy way to do it, and help you prevent that kind of turnover problem, right? So, yeah, I'll stop there if you have questions, but here's my email at the bottom, kwilson@scroggins-greer.com. Be happy to talk to you about it. But if you have any questions, Paige, you want to jump in there, and you can see the chat probably better than I can if there's anything jumping out. But
right. Thanks, Keith. This has been fantastic. I don't have any questions in the chat now, but I would like to open it up if anybody wants to ask Keith a question, or you can pose that in the chat. All right, I don't have any questions, Keith, but what I'd like to do is let anybody on the call know that if they want to follow.
I'm lost my audio there for a second, so.
Sorry, Keith. If anybody would like to connect with Keith directly after this presentation, you're certainly welcome to do so. You'll get an email from Lisa Prescott, and that'll contain all the information. And we appreciate you joining us. We're taking June and July off of Management Minutes. We'll be back in August.
If you can hear me, sorry, I can't hear much.
Sorry. And we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, everybody.